could we start about talking about the burial plot? So I know this is your latest book. It just came out in June, is that correct?
Yes.
Fantastic. Could you tell us a little bit more about the starting process for the story? How did it come to be?
So originally this was meant to be my second novel. It's actually my third. And after I finished The Doll Factory, which was my debut, which was published with a bit of sort of publishing fanfare, which came with its excitement but also its pressure. I hadn't realised at that point that whenever I finish a book, I feel sort of completely bereft and like that is the only story I can tell. And that's not true, but it was how I felt when I finished it, and I thought it was true at that point. And I felt kind of, I felt sort of a little bit hopeless. You know, I'd put all of my ideas, I felt, all of my interests into one book, and what could I possibly write next? So I decided at that point to go for a walk, and I lived in Tower Hamlets at the time, near Tower Hamlets Cemetery. And I knew a little bit about the cemetery as I was walking through it. I knew about the magnificent seven cemeteries, which were there were seven cemeteries, kind of almost like on a clock face around London in the suburbs, which were set up in response to the burial crisis, where inner city graveyards were literally overflowing. But they were also money-making enterprises, and the ground was worth more to house the dead than the living. And I thought that was fascinating. Like Highgate was bought for £3,000, and it turned a profit of £220,000. So everyone wanted to invest in these companies. So I knew a little bit about that. But it was when I was walking through the cemetery that I thought, I really began to picture it. I began to picture this patch of land suddenly turned into this grand and beautiful garden of the dead, with, you know, mausoleums being constructed, the stones of the chapel being winched into place. And it just seemed completely irresistible for an idea. But all I had at that point was the idea. I had the setting, but not, I suppose, the plot, so to speak. And it took me, I wrote around this idea of this setting for a whole year, and I got nowhere. I wrote maybe 100,000 words, which I scrapped, and I didn't really have the characters. I didn't really have the pull through. I didn't have the heart of the book. And so I wrote Circus of Wonders because I was so frustrated with not finding the story when there were so many snippets that I wanted to include. And then I feel like that kind of distance after I'd written Circus of Wonders, I thought, you know, there is something there is something interesting, there is something I keep coming back to. And then I had the idea of Bonnie and Crawford and this idea of trickery and money making and all of that, and then it kind of just grew from there, and I found it immensely enjoyable to write.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how Bonnie started and how she started to develop and grow? Did you have any initial ideas? Did you take any inspiration from perhaps some other stories or other things you'd seen?
She was definitely my most difficult female protagonist to write, because not only is she very caught up in Crawford, but also she behaves in ways which are kind of, they are at times manipulative. They are, sometimes she can kind of fall on the wrong side of what is considered sort of morality. But that was what interested me. I wanted to see, you know, make sure I was pulling the reader along. Like, how far did I have the reader? How far could I get the reader on her side until she's doing things and behaving in a way and sort of trying to kind of basically overtake this house in a way where all of a sudden you draw back and you think, how far is this too far? How far is too far? Like, I love the idea of kind of having almost the reader's discomfort with what they're rooting for. Like, I thought a lot of The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith, where, you know, Tom Ripley, you're rooting for him so much that at one point I was like, just kill him, you know. So you actively wanting a character to murder another character, and for me the tension, and for many other people, comes from, I really hope he gets away with it, please get away with it. And it's the sort of the near misses of him almost being caught that kept me reading through that book, and that is just genius. I mean, it's partly because all of the other characters are so odious that Tom Ripley becomes the moral centre of the book, but I did, that is an idea I find immensely interesting. So with Bonnie, she is a much more complicated heroine than my other heroines, who are more straightforwardly good. But I had a lot of fun crafting her. But as I say, she went through so many drafts, so many iterations, just thinking, just do I have the reader on side?
Well, you've just mentioned you've got your two wonderful children.
Yeah.
What's it like being, I guess, full-time mum, full-time author. How do you kind of juggle home life and work life? How does that work out for you?
I mean, it's difficult, right? It's my son's 3 and my daughter's 14 months. Yeah, the second one, I'm like, she was born at some point.
She's here.
She's here. And I finished the burial plot. I sent sort of the last round of major edits on August 30th, and I know that because my daughter was born on August 31st. So it was like to the wire, like trying to race the book, trying to race my daughter being born, and I guess, I mean, I'm not sure how interested people are in motherhood versus writing, but I'm really proud that I managed to do it. Between I started writing it when my son was 4 months old, but one thing I was always so adamant about was that I would get childcare for him, because so many authors I know say, "Oh, I wrote it my son's naps or my daughter's naps," and I think, I wouldn't expect my husband to do his job during my son's naps, or my brother who's a surgeon to do his surgery during his daughter's naps, and I felt it was very important for me to guard that time of my work pretty closely. But it was just such a different beast writing while I had a baby versus when I didn't, because before I could like lock myself away and be obsessive and weird and talk to nobody for 8 hours and just live in my head with my book. And I found that my first 2, I edited them so much as I went, and I sort of finessed things, I honed things. I didn't speak to anyone for 8 hours at a time. And then obviously when you've got a child, you can't really lock yourself away in the same way. And I didn't want to either, because I kind of wanted to engage with him a little bit. And so what I did with this book is I quite quickly realized that old way of finessing wasn't working for me. And because I couldn't store that much in my head. I needed to get it on the page. So I decided to just write a really, really, really bad book. Really bad. And that's what I did. And then I deleted the whole thing and I didn't even look at it. But it was kind of more this, I needed to kind of regurgitate just the bare bones of what will go on to become this book in order to then work with that later.
How would you go about doing your historical research? Are there bits that you like read lots in advance and then get to the writing, or do you sort of leave some space open and go in later and try and fill in bits?
The latter, definitely. I think partly why the burial plot didn't work, first of all, was because I did too much up front. And I feel this great, I don't know if it's an anxiety, but just I have such a deep interest in what I'm researching that it's hard for me to see the wood for the trees sometimes, and I just want to put it all in. I want to have a morning emporium like Jay's Morning Emporium, which could had black fringed bloomers, and it could put a woman in black within 24 hours and things like that. I wanted to put everything in the book, and as a result, the book just felt so bogged down and so heavy, and it was kind of just very. It was just so heavily researched that I couldn't find the characters and I couldn't find the story. So ideally, I do as little as I possibly can before writing the first draft, and then I do it all. I do everything, because you have to do everything. If you whenever I'm reading a historical novel, I mean, I'm sure there are errors in my book, although I've done my utmost to avoid it. But if I'm reading a historical novel that makes even just lapses in vocabulary, for me it just breaks the spell. It breaks the magic, and I'm totally pulled out of that world. So yeah, I research. It's really fun doing research as well, because I always feel this kind of dogged need to achieve, and so I can read through a massive stack of books in the library and sort of tick, 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 and while I'm doing that, I find it particularly helpful after the first draft, because so much occurs to me, but in a very focused way. I think, oh, maybe actually this character could come from this background. Maybe, this is a small detail I could put in here. Oh, that's an interesting object. Maybe I could even use that as a simile or a metaphor or something like that. So yeah, little up front and then everything after.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.